From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome now to Balance of Power. This is where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We start with some news from the White House on the pace of COVID vaccinations, with President Biden expected to speak at the 1 p.m. Eastern hour on this subject. But we have a little sneak peek in advance. Joining us now is Bloomberg News White House reporter Josh Wingrove. So the president set some pretty lofty goals. Originally it was $100 million in his first 100 days, then $200 million in his first 100 days. What do we expect to hear from the president in a short time from now?
Yeah, they're going to hit that $200 million goal on Thursday. Tomorrow, we're going to expect him to talk about that. Bit of a pivot, I think, from him in that he's going to issue a call to employers, large and small, to do more to get their workers vaccinated. This is an implicit sign that they're sort of running out of arms of people who are sort of eager to chase down a shot wherever they can, and they're pivoting to try to make it easier for folks who want a shot or willing to get one, but aren't as motivated to really hunt one down. It needs to kind of be like presented to them. So that's what we're going to see. In particular, his American Rescue Plan, that first aid package that he signed, it had a provision on tax credits for companies with fewer than 500 employees. They can get up to $500 per worker per day in a tax credit to give their people paid time off to go get a shot. We're going to hear Joe Biden call employers to do that, in big or small, whether they qualify for the tax credit or not, have them do more to try to get people to get these shots in their arms.
Well, and that's the essence of it, isn't it, Josh? At the beginning, it was we don't have enough vaccine. Now it's more we have enough vaccine, but we can't necessarily get everybody to go along with it. What can the President of the United States do? Is it basically tax credits to small employers? Is that what he can do to encourage that? We think it's 20 to 30% of the population who is really resistant.
Yeah, I think tax credits are one. I think, they view people in sort of a range of like hesitancy, I guess. Some people flat don't want it. A lot of people were desperate to get it. We've sort of, gone through most, if not all, those people in a lot of parts of the country right now. And then there's people in the middle. I think they're going to focus on that. We're going to see them continue to try to steer shots to places like pharmacies, try to make it as easy as possible for people to get these shots. We still don't know that big X factor number. How many Americans actually do want a shot? Another problem right now he's having is supply. Remember that Johnson & Johnson vaccine still paused for use and still having production delays at that plant in Baltimore, a fresh delay found today.
Okay, Josh, thank you so much for joining us here. That's Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove, who reports from the White House. So how we do in fighting the coronavirus will have a profound effect on the course of our economy, as will the effects of the very large fiscal stimulus coming down the pipeline. To take us through what these effects might be, welcome now Nathan Sheets. He's PGIM Fixed Income Chief Economist. So, Nathan, you're an economist, as I say. You're not an epidemiologist. So let me ask you about the economy specifically. We have $1.9 trillion in that American Rescue Plan, another $2.25 trillion that's been asked for by the president. What do you anticipate the possible effects on the U.S. economy would be?
So the goal of the $1.9 trillion of stimulus is to support the economy over the next several quarters. It is the administration's effort to jolt the labor market and try to get as many workers who are on the sidelines and unemployed back to work as quickly as possible. So that's really about, the stimulus is about the here and now. Whereas the infrastructure is the Biden administration's effort to raise the longer term productive capacity of the economy, if you will, to raise trend growth or growth over the medium term. And it's slower dispersing and it's more focused on capital and R&D, and investments will pay off over time.
Critical distinction, it seems to me, because on the one hand, it looks like the economy may be on its way to bouncing back with the help of all that monetary as well as fiscal stimulus. But the question is the longer-term trend growth for the economy. If, in fact, and this is contrary to the fact, but if, in fact, we had the $2.25 trillion approved, spent over 8 years or so, what do you anticipate as an economist it would do to productivity?
This is the huge question. If the Biden approach is successful, I think maybe you could raise long-term U.S. potential growth and the productivity trend by a few tenths of a percentage point. So if trend growth is 2% before, maybe we could get up to 2.25%. That sounds small, but if you multiply that out over many years, the aggregate effect on people's lives is quite significant. But I think that's kind of the range of possible impacts. You know, some might be more optimistic than I am, but I think that's where kind of the bid-ask spread is, if you will.
What is the risk, if any, of overshooting here? You know, there's a debate going on, maybe with Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, on the one side saying, look, we don't really see a lot of inflation. If it comes, we'll take care of it. On the one hand. On the other hand, you have people like Olivia Blanchard and Larry Summers saying, I think you're pumping an awful lot of money into this economy, much larger than the output gap. Where do you come out of that debate?
So we are looking at an economy that is just going to boom over the next several quarters. And in that context, I think there is a possibility that we see some overheating in the sense of some inflation that's above the Fed's target. But first of all, I would expect any kind of overheating or higher inflation would most likely be a temporary phenomenon. And secondly, Jay Powell and his colleagues have emphasized they're not looking for sustained inflation that's too high, but they're happy to have it above 2%. If it somehow overshoots even that, Paul Volcker gave them the playbook, and it means that they're going to have to hike rates. Now, that could be painful, but I also put a fairly low probability on that kind of outcome. I think that the economy will be able to absorb it.
Nathan, now you are senior economist at PGIM Fixed Income, so you pay attention to fixed income. That's after having senior positions at the Fed as well as the Treasury Department. So let me ask you about the yield of the 10-year, because I certainly don't understand it. Divine what's going on there, because it shot up very fast. I mean, still low levels, but it shot up. The rate was really fast. Then it seems to have plateaued, even come down a little bit. What is it telling us about the economy, do you think?
Well, the run-up in the 10-year Treasury yield earlier this year was a quote-unquote reflation trade, where markets were pricing in the probability of stronger growth and somewhat higher inflation both this year and for some years to come. Now, what we've seen over the last few weeks is some pulling back in that. And I think part of that is that Jay Powell and his colleagues have been on a campaign to reassure the markets and reassure the public, one, that high inflation isn't likely, and two, they have tools to respond to it. In addition, I think a lot of market participants are looking at the path of inflation over the medium term, and there are good reasons to expect that it's going to be low like it was before the pandemic. Many of those factors that drove low inflation in 2015 through 2019 are likely to still be in place. And I think that's kind of this dynamic that we're seeing in the 10-year Treasury yield.
We've been talking largely about the U.S. economy. Let's make it international, because you have a lot of experience in international economics. What we're looking at right now, it appears, is really the opposite of synchronized global growth. You have China doing apparently quite well, the United States coming back, Europe not so much, and then you get to some parts of emerging markets, and it's pretty ugly at the moment. What are the ramifications of that for an investor?
The global asymmetries now are really quite extraordinary. As you said, China very much led the way last year. The United States seems to be following next in line, but some of the emerging markets in particular, India, Mexico, continue to struggle with the pandemic. Brazil is another one, and we expect growth there to be very soft. And it creates for investors an array of investment opportunities, and especially those in those parts of the world like the United States that are likely to outperform. It also has huge implications for foreign exchange markets, where those stronger economies are likely to be relatively attractive for investors and see their exchange rates appreciate, while some of these others are likely to see depreciation. So kind of putting it together, this divergence creates a lot of cross currents for investors and for the markets to be sorting through.
Okay, Nathan, it's always such a treat to have you with us. Thank you for your time. That's Nathan Sheets. He's PGIM Fixed Income Chief Economist and Head of Global Macroeconomic Research. Coming up, the prospects for criminal justice reform in the wake of the Chauvin verdict from Professor Gloria Brown Marshall of John Jay College. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, the Justice Department is taking a hard look at policing practices in Minneapolis in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke to reporters earlier today.
The investigation I am announcing today will assess whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of using excessive force, including during protests. The investigation will also assess whether the MPD engages in discriminatory conduct and whether its treatment of those with behavioral health disabilities is unlawful.
The move comes the day after a white former Minneapolis cop, Derek Chauvin, was found guilty of killing Floyd, an unarmed black man, when he knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes in May of 2020. President Biden is bringing together citizens of foreign leaders along with corporate executives, union heads, and Pope Francis in a 2-day virtual summit meant to invigorate the global fight against climate. The president wants to show the U.S. is committed to making deep greenhouse gas emissions cuts needed to avert the most catastrophic consequences of climate change. The event begins this Thursday, which is Earth Day. German lawmakers have approved Chancellor Angela Merkel's controversial lockdown law. Officials are struggling to contain a fresh wave of coronavirus infections that's putting intense pressure on hospitals. The law gives federal officials the authority to impose tighter restrictions in virus hotspots, including nighttime curfews and closing schools and non-essential stores. Russian President Vladimir Putin is warning rival nations not to cross his country's red line in their actions or face tough reaction. In his annual State of the Nation speech in Moscow, President Putin didn't single out any rivals for criticism, saying Russia would decide where its red line lies on a case-by-case basis. He also touted Russia's new nuclear weapons and renewed an offer for talks with other world powers to increase strategic stability. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you very much, Mark. We want to continue now on the aftermath of the conviction of Derek Chauvin yesterday for the murder of George Floyd. And we welcome Professor Gloria Brown Marshall of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So, Professor, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, you have been a civil rights litigator as well as a professor of constitutional law there at John Jay now. Give us a sense of what comes next. And let's pick up on something we just heard from Mark, actually, which is the Attorney General, Merrick Garland's announcement. They're going to be investigating the Minneapolis Police Department. What do you expect to come out of that? And do you expect perhaps more similar investigations of other police departments?
Well, but we still need national criminal justice reform because we have 18,000 police jurisdictions. And so we can't do this piecemeal. It has to be national. The same way we did with Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, we had national reform that looked at the race-based nature of America's history and then chose the reforms based on that. I think it's great, and I applaud Merrick Garland for this effort, but that's one of 18,000 police departments, and this is a national effort that must take place.
So that's a powerful point. We heard President Biden as well as Vice President Harris yesterday talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill law that is pending right now in Congress, passed by the House, not by the Senate. Would that, in your opinion, if it were enacted, effectuate the kind of fundamental reform you're talking about?
I think it would, but here's what I would add that's new that people aren't talking about, and that's the prosecutor's office. If we don't include the prosecutor's office in any criminal justice reform on a national basis, then we've missed an opportunity, because it doesn't matter what the law says if the prosecutors don't prosecute police officers who break it. I think also we need to know from the prosecutor's office perspective how many cases based on racial data that they actually have before them. Who is keeping the data on when police officers commit these crimes or take the lives? Over 1,000 Americans die at the hands of police every year. We have less than 40 cases in the history of the country. That means prosecutors are not prosecuting. Without them, we can't have true reform.
So this is a terrific point that, frankly, I had not focused on before. Explain to me, because I haven't read all of the bill. I've read parts of it. Does it include big data, if I can put it that way? Because as we know in this world, actually disclosure and data goes a long way to reform.
It includes data, but I need the Justice Department to keep the data. We can't rely on, right now, I love journalism. I am a legal correspondent covering the U.S. Supreme Court, but we can't have this piecemeal data retrieval that comes through what killings or other violence makes the newspaper. And then from there, the Washington Post or the Guardian, then keeps the data. We need to have the Justice Department keep the data. But here's something I would add new too, that we must have the data go directly to the Justice Department on penalty of perjury if it's not provided. Because right now it's voluntary. And we have to have something more than this voluntary nature or the media getting this data to know exactly who is being harmed by the police and when these things happen, whether or not there's a video, so we don't have to wait to find a video later after protests.
So let's assume this happened the way you're describing it right now. Explain to me how it would work. We get all this data from all the 18,000, I think you said, police departments around the country, and it goes to the Justice Department. They look at it, and it's about both the police department and about prosecutions, as I understand it, as well. They see something that's wrong, that looks like it's a pattern that's troubling. What do they do then? What is their power to try to effectuate change?
Well, right now, just as Merrick Garland said, they're going to investigate the Minnesota Police Department and the Minneapolis Police Department. What we've had in the past under, for example, Eric Holder, was the investigation of medium-sized police departments. They were under consent decrees to change their behavior. If the Justice Department sees a pattern in practice, or they understand that there's been an uptick or there's been a killing in that particular jurisdiction, then they can focus on that jurisdiction. Right now, the only way we know what's going on is if there's video. We don't have really any information. That's terrible. Here we are in the 21st century. We have data collection based on race for education. We have it for employment, but we don't have it for criminal justice at the scene, at the site. We get it over time through the Bureau of Justice Statistics. We need to have information at the scene, at the site, from the police departments, and especially from the prosecutor's office. Whom are they prosecuting and whom they are ignoring? Too often the prosecutors and the police department work hand in hand, and the prosecutors then turn their backs when it comes to a suspect who is a police officer.
So, Professor, I think it's fair to say most Americans, maybe all Americans, say this can't keep going on. It does, but it can't at the same time. We've had too many of these cases right now. And as President Biden said last night, this is all too rare that actually somebody is truly held accountable for them. At the same time, as you look at fundamental reform, do you feel any need or value in also reassuring people about the police? That is to say, there are some bad police that need to be rooted out, root and branch. At the same time, the majority of police are trying to do something good for us, and we need to have some sort of trust relationship with our police.
Well, that's why defund the police is not that, most people are saying defund the police from doing activities beyond their expertise, dealing with the mental health issues and homelessness. That should be part of another government agency and for nonprofit and religious-based organizations. What we're having here is a lack of trust because those police officers who are good, and I truly believe most people go into policing because they want to help their communities. However, those three officers who are yet to be tried are the officers who represent those others who stand by as the rogue, corrupt cops, then ruin their profession. You cannot have this blue wall of silence, this blue mafia, where they have, once you get in, you have to stay quiet forever, no matter how diabolical you see the sin within the department. Those three officers stood by, and they shouldn't have. They should have acted. They were rookie cops. Can you imagine this man, Chauvin, is training them how to terrorize the Black community? One cop had only been out of the academy for 48 hours. So we cannot have those good cops stand by and let the rogue cops ruin their reputations.
Another really important point, that this was a rare case in part because that blue wall, as you describe it, broke down, and too often it stands up. Thank you so much. Really great to have you with us, Professor. That's Gloria Brown-Marshall, Professor of Constitutional Law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Later this hour, we're going to talk with Jane Harman of the Wilson Center about the heightened tensions with Russia. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Stocks are rebounding today. Joining us now is Abigail Doolittle. So yesterday at this time, I said, is 2 days a pattern? If it is, it looks like it's going to be maybe ending today.
Indeed, David, because we do have the bull stepping in. And it wasn't the case on the open. You still had small declines at that point, but then the dip buyers came out slowly, timidly, really looking past the Netflix disaster. And in fact, Netflix's miss, I should say, could be one reason that we do have stocks higher. That S&P 500 up 0.6% near session highs. The transports up 1.25%. The airline index, David, snapping a 10-day losing streak, soaring up 1.7%. And then you also have the hotels up 1.8%. So when we connect that to Netflix, of course, just missed really frankly across the board, but especially relative to the subscriber numbers. They added far fewer than what the street was looking for, what they were looking for. The forecast is hugely disappointed. That's good news, though, relative to the pandemic, David. It suggests that this company that usually forecasts very well has very little visibility coming out of the pandemic. They benefited from the stay-at-home, but again, this is a real sign, perhaps, that the stay-at-home trend is truly coming to an end. The pandemic is not at an end, but we have that light at the end of the tunnel, and folks, quite frankly, aren't sitting in front of their screen. So I think that's why you have a bit of a rebound, especially for travel and leisure.
But I love the way you put that. It's almost like a teeter-totter, because on the one hand, if we're going to stay at home, Netflix goes up, airlines go down. And if we're going to come back out, then Netflix, it goes down and airlines go up. Is it just as simple as that? Are we going to keep seeing that?
It's interesting that you should bring that up, because I always think of it in that way, too, as a seesaw. On the one side, you have those stay-at-home stocks, and what makes them so important is that they're such a huge part of the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, 25%, 50%, depending on what you're including. On the other hand, you have these reopening and reflation sectors, energy, financials, the travel and leisure, not as much of a weighting. So it kind of balances out. It's a very fine line where, the stay-at-home, they can give back a little bit, but not too much before it weighs on the markets. You really need those reflationary in there, David.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story today. Thank you so much for telling it to us. That's Abigail Doolittle reporting on the markets. Coming up, Russian President Vladimir Putin gives his annual address amid rising tensions with much of the West. We talk with Wilson Center President Emerita. She is Jane Harman. That's coming up next on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Television, and we are on Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We have some breaking news right now. UiPath has just started trading on the New York Stock Exchange. It is an automation software company that actually does software for robots. Backers include Google owner Alphabet. It was priced at about $56 a share. It's up about 66 right now, so it's up, but it's early going. Just started trading UiPath on the New York Stock Exchange. In the meantime, for Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
The United States is set to cross a major vaccine milestone this week. President Biden will announce today the country has met his goal of administering more than 200 million vaccine doses in his first 100 days in office. More than half of all American adults are now partially vaccinated. The president's also expected to outline his plans to ramp up the vaccination rollout even further. Greece is trying to revive its struggling tourism industry. The country says it will reopen to visitors on May 15th, when a ban on travel between different regions in the country will also be lifted. Restaurants will be allowed to reopen outdoor areas next month as well. Many of the restrictions have been in effect since November. Mexico is beefing up its government personnel presence at its southern border to respond to current immigration flows. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador did not say how many more personnel will be sent, but he said today his priority is protecting children who are arriving at the border. President Obrador says a formal plan will be unveiled in about a week. An upcoming international peace conference aimed at moving Afghanistan's warring sides to a power-sharing deal has been postponed. The decision to delay the conference came several days after Taliban insurgents, who are key to peace efforts, dismissed the conference in Istanbul as a political spectacle serving American interests. No new date was given for the talks, which are slated to begin Saturday. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. President Vladimir Putin delivered his annual address earlier today, issuing a stern warning that, quote, organizers of any provocations against Russia will regret it more than ever before. Russia will respond with an asymmetric, quick, and harsh response. We welcome now Jane Harman, President Emerita of the Wilson Center. She earlier served as the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee and is the author of Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. So thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being back with us. President Putin's talking tough. That in itself might not be big news, but he's talking tough in a world in which there is increasing confrontation between Russia and the West, the United States, but not just the United States. What is going on with Russia right now?
I think what's been going on for a long time, which is Vladimir Putin sowing confusion and chaos, getting headlines, sounds sort of like the last president we had in the United States, with troops surging along the border with Ukraine, making Ukrainians fear an invasion, which is highly unlikely. Most people don't think that will happen. But this is what he does. I bet he wishes he had our stock market. Just heard about that. And our economy and our record on vaccinations, but he doesn't. And this administration will confront him in ways the last one didn't. The sanctions imposed a week or so ago hit just the right things: sovereign wealth funds and debt instruments, which fuel Putin's plutocracy. And another round of sanctions against all his oligarchs would be highly effective. And I think they may be coming too, depending on what he does.
It's awfully hard to separate the internal from the external, but give us some sense. Mr. Putin has some issues internally as well with Alexei Navalny, apparently in very grave condition in a Russian prison and possible demonstrations across the country. How much of this is Mr. Putin really concerned about internal issues? As I understand, his popularity appears to be going down somewhat, as opposed to really a standoff against not just the United States, but really Europe, I think.
I think that's a fair point. The Navalny situation is outrageous. I mean, first he tried to poison him, and he suffered on an airplane getting out to Germany. And then in an act of extraordinary bravery, came home and now is in grave condition in prison for the next 2 years. If he survives it, I think it will be a huge problem for Putin if Navalny dies. I mean, he will be more of a pariah on the world stage. The Europe thing is also tricky because he wants to transfer gas to Germany in the Nord Stream pipeline. Germany may welcome that, but there's an election coming up in Germany, and Germany might try to block that. And that's one of his only sources, so far as I know, of a real currency at this point in Russia's failing economy. So he's in bad shape, but he's very good at striking out when he's in bad shape. That has not deterred him.
Jane, you already said that you approve of the sanctions that have been taken just within the last week against the primary market for Russian sovereign debt. At the same time, some people said, you know what, that didn't go as far as it might go. Was that smart to keep something in your back pocket? Because if you went after secondary market, it would hurt more, right?
Totally smart. I think the Biden administration, which is the most experienced foreign policy administration, including him, since George Bush 41, last 4 presidents, as I say in my book, had much less experience, and it showed. At any rate, I think they know what they're doing, and they're ratcheting this up just a bit. And we're also trying to talk to Russia. President Biden has invited President Putin to meet in some location in the next year or so. And I bet he'll take Biden up on that. Maybe there'll be a lot more theatrics before that, but I bet that will happen, just as the Iranians are being hit, it seems, as reported by the Israelis, but are still willing to talk to us. And I think that this is showing that surging diplomacy and smart tactics is working for the Biden administration.
So the Biden administration clearly has an experienced foreign policy team. Doesn't mean that they're always right. Were they right in deciding to pull the last 2,500 troops out of Afghanistan? Because there are some people who are saying they were wrong, that we could have kept them there for an extended period of time and it would have made a fundamental difference on the ground for example, women living in Afghanistan.
Well, the title of my book is Insanity Defense: How Our Failure to Confront Hard, hard problems makes us less safe. And this is a hard problem. We went into Afghanistan for the right reasons, right after 9/11, attacking those who attacked us. Congress authorized the use of military force. I voted for that. But then we overstayed and we militarized the mission in ways we should not have. Hindsight is always better. But we're now figuring out that keeping these folks there will just perpetuate what's been going on, the insanity of it. And I think Biden's making a big and correct bet, which is surging diplomacy, which we're trying to do. I know they just put off this meeting we're trying to hold in Turkey. But I would predict that over time, if the Taliban doesn't want to be a pariah force forever, that they will come around. There are women in the negotiating team for the Taliban. And I don't predict automatically, even if there's an initial push to hurt women. I think the Afghans could end up wanting a decent government after all, which is, I think, the bet we have to make. We can't prop up their government forever. We need to work on our own democracy. And we had a good result yesterday in the George Floyd trial.
So finally, Jane, I want to talk about a loss that our country had this week, and that's the loss of former Vice President Walter Mondale, also former presidential candidate. I know that you knew him. Give us your thoughts about Walter Mondale and his position in United States history.
Well, decency in public service. Fritz and Joan Mondale lived on my block before he was picked by picked to be vice president by Jimmy. Am I messing this up? No, by Jimmy Carter. Yep. And I worked in the Carter White House. And I knew him there. He was the first vice president to have a real portfolio, which he asked for and which he handled with grace. And then he picked Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate in 1984. It was a huge deal. Sadly, the election didn't turn out well. But that reaching for that very talented woman who would have made our country proud, as he would have had they won the election, was the right thing to do. And I spoke at her funeral with him and Madeleine Albright and both Clintons. And I was very, very honored to celebrate a moment in American history that we have finally come around to have now with Kamala Harris as our vice president.
And Jane, I want to conclude with foreign policy, actually, because I think people may underestimate the influence of Walter Mondale, particularly with respect to Middle East peace negotiations.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, he was, this has been pointed out by historians talking about him, he was one of the first to understand what we needed to be doing in the Middle East, and he put himself forward. And to remind, part of the foreign policy of the Carter administration was elevating human rights as one of the tenets of foreign policy. That had not happened before. And Fritz Mondale goes down to me as one of the most decent, bravest, nicest people we've ever had in public life.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. Really great to have you with us and particularly share those thoughts about Fritz Mondale. That's Jane Harman. She's Wilson Center Distinguished Fellow and President Emerita. Now let's check on the UiPath again. Remember, that's the software company involved with robots. It started trading this hour. It's an automation software company, as I say. Backers include Google, Owner, Alphabet, and the stock is up above what the offering price was, which was $56, and it's trading up over $66 now. We'll keep you apprised of that as things developed. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Workers around the country are beginning to return to the office slowly and in fits and starts, with many expecting that even when things are truly safe, many of us will still spend at least some of our weeks working from home. Robert Pozen of MIT's Sloan School of Management has studied the question and co-authored a forthcoming book with Alexandra Samuel, and it's called Remote Inc., How to Thrive at Work Wherever You Are. Welcome now to Bob Pozen. Bob, thanks for being with us. You gave us a little taste of this piece already in the Hill in a piece you wrote. Give us your sense about where we are headed in terms of what is called now, I guess, hybrid work situations.
I think most people are not going to want to be totally remote or totally in the office. They're going to want a hybrid situation in which they come into the office 2 or 3 days a week and they're at home 2 or 3 days a week. But it's a complicated question as to which 2 days and what exactly you should do where. So the first thing you have to do is think about the nature of your work. If it's collaborative, if it involves a lot of brainstorming, then probably you need to be in the office a little more. If it's concentrated work, if it's work where you can do it on your own, then being home makes more sense. The second thing is most people are working as part of a team. So it's really important that the team be in the office the same days so they can coordinate and work together. And the third is that companies really need to do a lot to support people who are working at home. A lot of people at home don't have the right type of internet connections. They don't have strong enough computers, and they really need support. So it'd be great for companies to reimburse them for setting up their home offices or for improving their internet. So these are the sorts of things that everyone's going to have to sort out. We call it finding the Goldilocks plan. Not too much remote work and not too little.
So, Bob, let me ask you the tricky question that people don't tend to talk about yet, and that is who gets to decide? Because when the pandemic hit, most employers said, look, if you don't feel comfortable in coming in the office, don't, because it's your personal health and safety. When we get past that point, and it's not a matter of personal health and safety, but rather preference, how much does the employer get to decide whether you should be in the office, and how much does the employee get to decide whether they want to be in the office?
Well, I think it has to be a negotiated agreement, because you start with what the employee wants, and the employee will base that on his or her own situation. But employers are going to have a big say. We have some employers who are saying we need employees to come back 2 or 3 days a week, and they really do, because that's the way a lot of collaborative work goes. That's a lot of brainstorming. They think it's necessary to maintain culture. So I would say let the employee choose first, but then the employer sets some constraints on that. And the constraints are most focused on teamwork and the importance of teamwork and the importance of culture. In this sort of environment, managers have a big role. That's the embodiment of the organization. And managers have to work a lot harder about establishing ground rules for the team and figuring out what the optimal combination is for the team. So it might differ within, say, JP Morgan. You might have a very different rule for people who are branch employees, where there's a lot of customer relations, versus people who are doing programming, versus people who are investment analysts. So I think we really need to have the team manager figure out what's best for the team, even within large organizations.
So there are questions about, how we work, where we work. There may also be broader questions, demographic questions that are raised, even political questions in this sense. You've suggested that, for example, if we can work from home, some people may work longer into their lives, frankly, as they get more and more senior, more flexibility. Also, there's talk about actually people living in different places, different states, which could have political overtones about which states gain citizens, which lose.
Yeah, I think both points are very important. I've always been a strong advocate of not seeing retirement as an all or nothing thing. Most people, if you ask them after age 60, they'd like to work half time or 2/3 time, something. And being able to work from home gives them the flexibility that allows them to do it. So I think we will see more and more people move into gradual retirement and not just, falling off the end of the earth. And I think that's good for them. It's good for the economy, good for companies. The political implications are pretty important. I mean, we've had a lot of people leave New York City, and they've left places like San Francisco. And where have they gone? A lot of them have gone to places like Austin, Texas. We see a lot of them going to Miami, which has become a bit of an entrepreneurial hub. So that's going to change the political complexion. As we all know, Florida is a very close state between Republicans and Democrats in elections. So if we have an influx of a lot of urbanites who tend to be a little more liberal, that might change Florida, and the same thing in Texas. So these are going to be big changes. So we have companies that are moving their headquarters to places that they didn't think of before. And then we have other companies that are saying, let's have a headquarters, but let's have some satellite offices. And we need you to come into those satellite offices. Could be in Texas or Florida.
Bob, finally, here at the end, I want to ask you about a very complex thing, but we'll keep it a small issue, and that is Social Security. Because in addition to running MFS Investment and also being a senior person at Fidelity, you also were part of President Bush's commission on Social Security. Forget about what we could do about Social Security. That's a longer conversation. Answer one simple question. Is there any realistic prospect of it even getting on the agenda? Because I'm not sure it's on the agenda right now in Washington.
I think it's on the agenda in the limited sense that progressives are saying we want to expand benefits. And I'm all for expanding benefits for people in the lower third. But we have to come to grips with the fact that we have a system that is insolvent. So we'd have to do some reduction in the growth of benefits for the higher third. And that's been politically a third rail. And I actually don't think we'll do very much until we come within a year or two of insolvency. When the checks don't go out, then you have across the board cuts of roughly 25%. And that, that specter will move Congress, but that might not be till 2030.
Yeah, who was it that said nothing focuses the mind like imminent death? I think was the quote, something like that. Thank you so much. It's great to have you with us, Bob. That's Bob Pozen. He's senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and co-author of the forthcoming book, Remote Inc., How to Thrive at Work Wherever You Are. Coming up, in advance of the White House summit tomorrow, we hear from former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, United Nations Special Envoy for Climate. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Tomorrow is the White House Summit on Climate. But today, UN Special Envoy on Climate and former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney talked about the issues on Bloomberg surveillance.
There is an urgency to this. We're tracking as a world. You said Paris didn't succeed. It succeeded in the objective. It got people in, but the policies are still consistent with a world that's north of 3 degrees, warming north of 3 degrees. So this is a critical year for action. There's tremendous momentum now. We need to reinforce that momentum. And again, having 70 trillion of private capital coming behind net zero, which is what's been announced today, is the type of momentum the world needs.
Let me ask a rude question. How do you convince the United States Senate?
First, it's in the United States' interests directly in terms of the impacts of climate change. It's also fundamentally, and I'll refer to the comments of Secretary Blinken a couple of days ago, this is fundamentally an issue, becoming an issue of competitiveness, of economic competitiveness. The world is moving in this direction. The firms that are innovating, that are lower carbon, that are part of the solution, and the financial institutions that are getting behind those solutions are doing very well. They will do much, much better. This is where the world's headed. The question is pace. The U.S., as in many things, should be the leader, can be the leader, and those countries that are the leader will reap the rewards as they should.
That was UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, Mark Carney, who, of course, was the former governor of the Bank of England. That summit at the White House tomorrow on climate. As we all know, this has been a priority of Joe Biden as the candidate and now as the President of the United States to address the climate issue in a way that is 180 degrees, I think it's fair to say, around from where his predecessor Donald Trump was headed. He's taking us back into the Paris Accords, and he wants to make real progress. In fact, People are speculating, at least, that he may come up with, if not tomorrow, soon, some ambitious goals that go beyond what the United States has promised before, because he needs to reassure other people at that summit that, in fact, the United States is serious. We've gotten religion again. We really do want to try to make a big difference, and he has to prove it. Interestingly, President Xi of China will be joining that summit, because one of the big questions is what the United States and China can do together. We need the first and the second largest economies in the world to work together on climate if we're really going to make any progress. So that summit coming up tomorrow, which we will be covering in its entirety. Coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to continue over on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we get to talk to Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford about policing reform in the wake of the Derek Chauvin verdict. There's a lot to talk about what happens in Washington, but there's a lot that can happen at the states as well. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.